Fictive kinship is a term used by anthropologists and ethnographers to describe forms of kinship or social ties that are based on neither consanguinal nor affinal ties, in contrast to true kinship ties, to the extent that consanguinal and affinal kinship ties might be considered real or true kinship. The term fictive kinship has in the past been used to refer to those kinship ties that are fictive in the sense of not real, invoking the concept as a cross-culturally valid anthropological category therefore rests on the presumption that the inverse category of kinship, built around consanguinity and affinity, is similarly cross-culturally valid. Use of the term was common until the mid to late 20th century, when anthropology effectively deconstructed and revised many of the concepts and categories around the study of kinship and social ties. In particular, anthropologists established that a consanguinity basis for kinship ties is not universal across cultures, and that, on the contrary, it may be a culturally specific symbol of kinship only in particular cultures. Stemming from anthropology's early connections to legal studies, the term fictive kinship may also be used in a legal sense, and this use continues in societies where these categories and definitions regarding kinship and social ties have legal currency, e.g., in matters of inheritance. As part of the deconstruction of kinship mentioned above, anthropologists now recognize that, cross-culturally, the kinds of social ties and relationships formerly treated under the category of kinship are very often not necessarily predicated on blood ties or marriage ties, and may rather be based on shared residence, shared economic ties, nurture kinship, or familiarity via other forms of interaction. In sociology of the family, this idea is referred to as chosen kin, fictive kin or voluntary kin. Sociologists define the concept as a form of extended family members who are not related by either blood or marriage. The bonds allowing for chosen kinship may include religious rituals, close friendship ties, or other essential reciprocal social or economic relationships. Examples of chosen kin include godparents, informally adopted children, and close family friends. The idea of fictive kin has been used to analyze aging immigrant communities and minorities in modern societies. Some researchers state that peers have the potential to create fictive kin networks. Examples: types of relations often described by anthropologists as fictive kinship include compadrazgo relations, foster care, common membership in a unilineal descent group, and legal adoption. A noted gurung tradition is the institution of roadie, where teenagers form fictive kinship bonds and become roadie members to socialize, perform communal tasks, and find marriage partners. In Western culture, a person may refer to close friends of one's parents as aunt or uncle, or may refer to close friends as brother or sister, although this is just a mere courtesy treatment and does not represent an actual valuation as such. In particular, college fraternities and sororities in some North American cultures usually use brother and sister to refer to members of the organization. Monastic, Masonic, and lodge organizations also use the term brother for members. Nursing sister is used to denote a rank of nurse, and the term sisterhood may be used for feminists. Fictive kinship was discussed by Jenny White in her work on female migrant workers in Istanbul. In her work, she draws on ideas of production and the women she works with being drawn together through webs of indebtedness, through which the women refer to each other as kin. These relationships are, however, less frequent than kin relationships, and serve purposes that are not comparable to, nor exclude, a natural family and much less natural and universal parents having children reproduction system. Compadrazgo is a form of fictive kinship that is rooted in central Mexico history for many years, literally meaning co-parenthood. Compadrazgo is a term to describe describe the set of relationships between a child, the parents, and the godparents. It has been hypothesized that these relationships evolved after the Spanish conquest in 1521 to help deal with stressful situations. These fictive kinships still exist in modern-day Mexican societies, and are established by providing some form of aid throughout the child's life. Godparents seldom become more important than parents, though much less in a non-economic fashion. Undocumented immigrants have also demonstrated fictive kin relationships. Undocumented restaurant workers are known to form pseudo-families in which they cooperate within living and working situations. These relationships benefit the workers by creating a support system that would otherwise be unavailable to those living far from home. These ties are, however, fictive in a strict sense and mean nothing to the people in such pretenses. Some fictive kin relationships have been discovered in Israel in relation to organ transplants. Hospital committees are formed to assess whether the organ donation is from a true family member or from a friend. In order to obtain organ transplants, some individuals are forced to find strangers and pay them compensation for the procedure. However, the relationship between the donor and recipient must be invented as a familial relationship in order to pass through the hospital committee. In this case, fictive kinship is created knowingly to both parties in order to achieve the goals, and is mutualistic in nature. Adoption and foster care have always been grouped into the fictive kinship category. The children are normally treated as the adopter's biological kin, receiving a lot of parental investment despite not having family ties. This view has been chastised by some who claim that notions of kinship are not always based on biological determinants. But these links do not mean that the adopters would not love more the biological offspring, given the extra-natural motivation of survival. The military has also been an avenue to propagate fictive kinship, such as the sense of brotherhood felt by the soldiers. Fictive kinship has been demonstrated among the spouses of military men and women as well. These relationships may facilitate close bonds that are beneficial during times of hardship. Other times, relationships can appear from the outside to be fictive kinship relationships, but the reality is that this appearance is just the result of kinship terminology. Members of the Shanti Naga village in North India refer to everyone, even strangers, in familial terms. A man would address another man of a similar in age as brother, and would address an older man as uncle. Although these terms used in addressing one another appear to be indicative of fictive kinship, they do not actually suggest the existence of ritual kin relationships. Critiques. Recently, many anthropologists have abandoned a distinction between real and fictive kin, because many cultures do not base the notion of kinship on genealogical relations. This was argued most forcefully by David M. Schneider in his 1984 book A Critique of the Study of Kinship. In response to this insight, Janet Carsten developed the idea of relatedness. She developed her initial ideas from studies with the Malays in looking at what was socialized and biological. Here she uses the idea of relatedness to move away from a pre-constructed analytic supposition which exists in anthropological thought between the biological and the social. Carsten argued that relatedness should be described in terms of indigenous statements and practices, some of which fall outside what anthropologists have conventionally understood as kinship. This does not imply, however, that human non-kin relationships, such as in tit-for-tat situations, even within a friendship relation, are more important than kin relationships, since the motivation is also related to one's survival and perpetuation, or that people are necessarily bound to the culture they are inserted in, nor can it be generalized to the point of claiming all individuals always undervalue kinship in the absence of nurturing. Herbert Gintis, in his review of the book Sex at Dawn, critiques the idea that human males were unconcerned with parentage, which would make us unlike any other species I can think of. Such individuals can be considered out of the natural tendency of living beings for survival through offspring. In response to a similar model advanced by E. O. Wilson, Rice University's David Queller said that such new model involves, and I suspect requires, close kinship. The theory also overlooks phenomena of survivalist non-kin or not close kin such as the one that can be seen on tribalism or ethnic nationalism. There is no culture in the world where people, at least as a whole, simply do not value their offspring or other kin-related people, as royal and other succession lines all around the globe demonstrate. Used in sociobiology. In the biological and animal behavioral sciences, the term kinship has a different meaning from the current anthropological usage of the term, and more in common with the former anthropological usage that assumed that blood ties are ontologically prior to social ties. In these sciences, kinship is commonly used as a shorthand for the regression coefficient of relatedness, which is a metric denoting the proportion of shared genetic material between any two individuals relative to average degrees of genetic variance in the population under study. This coefficient of relationship is an important component of the theory of inclusive fitness, a treatment of the evolutionary selective pressures on the emergence of certain forms of social behavior. Confusingly, inclusive fitness theory is more popularly known through its narrower form, kin selection theory, whose name clearly resonates with former conceptions of kinship in anthropology, whilst inclusive fitness theory thus describes one of the necessary conditions for the evolutionary emergence of social behaviors. The details of the proximate conditions mediating the expression of social bonding and cooperation have been less investigated in sociobiology. In particular, the question of whether genetic relatedness must necessarily be present for social bonding and cooperation to be expressed has been the source of much confusion, partly due to thought experiments in W. D. Hamilton's early theoretical treatments. In addition to setting out the details of the evolutionary selection pressure, Hamilton roughly outlined two possible mechanisms by which the expression of social behaviors might be mediated: the selective advantage, which makes behavior conditional in the right sense on the discrimination of factors which correlate with the relationship of the individual concerned, is therefore obvious. It may be, for instance, that in respect of a certain social action performed towards neighbors indiscriminately, an individual is only just breaking even in terms of inclusive fitness, if he could learn to recognize those of his neighbors who really were close relatives and could devote his beneficial actions to them alone. An advantage to inclusive fitness would at once appear. Thus, a mutation causing such discriminatory behavior itself benefits inclusive fitness and would be selected. In fact, the individual may not need to perform any discrimination so sophisticated as we suggest here, a difference in the generosity of his behavior, according to whether the situations evoking it were encountered near to, or far from, his own home, might occasion an advantage of a similar kind. Traditional sociobiology did not consider the divergent consequences between these basic possibilities for the expression of social behavior, and instead assumed that the expression operates in the recognition manner, whereby individuals are behaviorally primed to discriminate which others of the true genetic relatives, and engage in cooperative behavior with them. But when expression has evolved to be primarily location-based or context-based, depending on a society's particular demographics and history, social ties and cooperation may or may not coincide with blood ties. Reviews of the mammal, primate, and human evidence demonstrate that expression of social behaviors in these species are primarily location-based and context-based, and examples of what used to be labeled as fictive kinship are readily understood in this perspective. Social cooperation, however, does not mean people see each other as family or family-like, nor that people will value those known not to be related with them more than the ones who are, or simply neglect relatedness. Bibliography.